welcome to Urban Talk, and we are here because the times of the day demand that we have these conversations. And Urban Talk is an opportunity for us to have great conversations about things that are specifically relevant to us in the urban core, mostly to Blacks. But if you're urban and you're non-Black, Black or brown, then it still affects you the same way. But we want to have those kind of conversations. Right now, I have a special guest. And my special guest is here, and I want to tell you a little bit about her. First of all, this guest, hold on just a second. Hold on just a second. Wait a minute, let me see. I want to make sure the listeners can hear us. Is your volume on?
I was muted. Sorry, guys.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So I got two webinars going at the same time. So that was my wife needing some assistance. Okay. So our objective is to begin to talk about some of the things. The things that we're talking about today really is around the issue of school. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about the dynamics of schooling and some of the things that we've heard, because the topic today is about homeschooling. So first of all, let me tell you about my guest a little bit. The topic today is Black families and homeschooling. And I'm interviewing Mishawnda Mintz, who she and her husband successfully homeschooled three of their kids. She also initiated and stimulated a lot of conversation amongst Black folks who might be interested in homeschooling their kids. And there are several different reasons. This is not a new conversation. This conversation went on long before Mick got involved. In fact, this is a article from the Atlantic back in 2015, where it talked about an estimated 220,000 African Americans were currently being homeschooled, and that's according to the National Home Education Research Institute. And it discussed this issue as, and it didn't give a whole lot of reasons why Blacks are homeschooling or why they're not. That represents Black students represent about 15 to 16% of the public schools nationwide. And so now this is a follow-up to that, and it talked about the increase in homeschooling by Black folks, and it talks about part of the reason why. And this is a story from Baltimore, again, by the same organization, the Atlantic, that really reports on a lot of experiences of African Americans, and it talks about the racial inequalities in the public schools, and it was specifically talking about Baltimore, but research shows that these same concerns were very prevalent, and this is 2 years ago. It says that Black kids face systemic disadvantages in many different kind of ways, suspended a lot more higher rates than the white peers, and they rarely pass some of the dynamic tests that are taking place. And if it were just some, then you could say it's probably because of the students just were not really where they need to be in order to pass it. But when you look at it across the board and the common denominator is skin color and culture, then you got to start to realize maybe the teaching culture is a little bit different. And I see the same thing with Hispanic people also. This is interesting here. This is a 2020 conversation. And it talks about the research, the amounts of research that talks about the difference between the experience of Black students and the experience of white students. And most of the research, I would say all of the research I've seen, says that Black students are treated more harshly than their white peers. And most of it, I think, is not intentional, but it's probably cultural, but I'm sure some is intentional as well. This is a particular study by Edward Morrison and Perry. And what they talked about was they found that Black boys specifically are twice as likely to receive disciplinary actions and office referral, detention, suspension, and expulsion, typically for the same act. It also shows that Black girls were 3 times. So you got Black boys being twice as likely, 50%, girls 3 times as likely to be disciplined for the same or a lesser violation that begins to take place. These are middle class. We just say, well, maybe it's the schools, but these are middle class African American families that felt like they had to pull their kids out because their college education, their salary, and all of the advocacy they have on behalf of their children could not protect them from the racial hostility that they faced while they were in school. So a lot of the choice was, we will homeschool our kids. Now we have a pandemic. And so we went from 2015, where they didn't give a lot of reasons, 2018, where they gave some reasons, 2020, where researchers just mounted up that racial differences, and there's a difference between the racial experience of Black kids and other kids. Now here you were, decided, I think you were living in St. Louis, and decided to, I'm gonna homeschool my kids. It's an odd decision by a Black mom, especially a young Black family. So tell us, first of all, tell us a little bit about who you are, and then join the conversation.
So my name is Mishawnda Mintz. I'm a mother of 4, 27, 18, 15, and 11. I have been homeschooling actually for 15 years. I initially started homeschooling in Kansas City with my oldest daughter when she entered, well, actually it was the end of the first semester of her 6th grade year. It was that first year that the school district we were living in decided to move 6th grade to middle school. And so just decided, I started seeing some behaviors, some rebellious attitudes and behaviors from her, and decided that I would bring her home to kind of more ground her and root her more spiritually. So at the end of 2004, I withdrew her. In January 2005, the second semester of her 6th grade year, I started homeschooling her.
So the primary reason there was because she was being placed in a place with more mature students than you really wanted her to.
Exactly.
So now, I said earlier you homeschooled 3 of your kids, but actually it's 4.
Yep.
All of them. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just didn't. She did not graduate homeschooling, but she was homeschooled basically her 6th grade year, the second semester of her 6th grade year. Then we moved to St. Louis, and I was pregnant at that time. Unfortunately, I ended up miscarrying that baby, but because I was pregnant and had 2 little ones at home, and she wasn't really adapting to homeschooling very well, we enrolled her back into public school once we moved to St. Louis. So she was in public school 7th and 8th grade, and then we moved into the city in St. Louis, because at that time we were kind of living in a suburban area of St. Louis, one of the counties. We moved in the heart of St. Louis City right before she was to enter into high school, and we looked into their desegregation program, which would have had her bust out to a school 45 minutes away, and definitely would have been in an environment where she was the minority. It would have been harder for us to be involved in her education as much as we wanted to, because I was used to being a room parent and very involved in my kids' education. But with the 2 little ones at home and her being bused 45 minutes to an hour away, we didn't see how we would be able to be as active in her education as we wanted to be. So she, again, was homeschooled 9th and 10th grade.
Okay, well, let's get some clarity here. So St. Louis City is a different school district.
Yes, St. Louis City Public School.
And so the county school out there you were going to, she would have been going to, was what county school? What county school when you first moved out there, you know?
So we were living in University City when we first moved there.
Okay, all right. And so basically, now here's what sounds very different is the degree of control that you want to have in what your kids learn. Because a lot of kids are they drop their kids off. It's kind of like when I want my car repair, I just drop them off, and whatever the mechanic does, I just pay for it and move on. Some people treat their kids like that.
Yeah.
I'll drop them off, and whatever you tell me you did, I'll work on it. And whatever advice you give me, I'll try to make sure I do it at home.
Yeah.
Why are you different?
So for me, it's always been important for me to teach my kids, first and foremost, from a biblical perspective, and then secondly, from a Black perspective. So that's how I approach my homeschooling when I'm creating my curriculum, pulling things together for them. I also came to realize that I believe, for me personally, that I was called to homeschool. And so for me to do anything different would be disobedience for me.
All right. So, so you went through this process. So tell me what it's like a typical day, and I want you to skip to where you got 3 that you're homeschooled.
Right.
What does that day look like?
Okay, so it looks very different today because the 3 that are still at home, well, actually, Journey just graduated a few weeks ago. So my 18-year-old just graduated. And then I still have a rising junior. And then my son is a rising middle schooler. He's getting ready to be in 6th grade. And so since we've been homeschooling for so long, my kids actually work a little bit more independently today, which is the beautiful thing of homeschooling, that if you kind of lay the rails and kind of set expectations and train them properly, you know, when they get to middle school and high school, they can start working a little more independently, which frees you up then to start, you know, pursuing more of your interests and things like that. But as far as my homeschooling philosophy, I do apply a lot of the principles of the Charlotte Mason philosophy. And Charlotte Mason was basically an educator in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. And she believed that kids should be taught with living books, what's considered living books. And these are books written from a narrative perspective. So I don't use textbooks except for maybe for math. I have all these books that I use to educate my children. So, you know, we'll read an autobiography or a biography for history or even for science. We read lots and lots of literature. And like I said, for me, it's very important for them to learn about Black history. So I've been, I was very intentional about incorporating books that taught them history from a minority perspective, right? Not just from a very Eurocentric, really somewhat white supremacist perspective, you know? And so that's what's been, and then teaching them biblically from the same, with the same intention of not teaching them a westernized, whitewashed version of Christianity, but trying to teach them true Christianity, you know, not from a Eurocentric perspective.
And so a typical day, I guess a couple of questions. First, did you have a curriculum or a curriculum platform that you followed throughout the years? And then, or did you, you know, kind of have to put something together yourself? Because you said when you were developing your curriculum, then what if somebody says, I don't have the background, I don't know anything about that. I have kids at home now, and I just found out through this pandemic that teaching is hard.
Right. So in the beginning, I did use a box curriculum with my oldest, and basically made the mistake that most of us, when we begin homeschooling, make, which is trying to duplicate private or public school at home. And she hated it and rebelled against that as well. I spent most of the day, honestly, disciplining her because I was like really trying to be super like rigid with my schedule and legalistic with the time and all of this. And so that's always my first advice, is not try not to replicate public or private school, whatever it is you're used to at home. But many do start with a box curriculum set. Today, the box curriculum set I would recommend would be Sonlight, Sonlight. And Sonlight is a literature-rich curriculum. And and they apply a lot of the Charlotte Mason type principles as well with regards to their approach. But that would be, if someone was looking for a boxed set, I would recommend Sonlight.
So you got Sonlight first, and then that the only one, or that's the primary one? Or?
I personally, I've been in the game so long, I do kind of pull together my own curriculum. with regards to Charlotte Mason, there is a free online curriculum at Ambleside. It's called amblesideonline.org. And
Now,
what they
spell
provide,
it for me.
AMBLESIDE online.org.
Okay.
And so what they do is they provide book lists, pacing, scheduling. Many of the books they have links to where you can go to ebooks, free ebooks online, or you can order those books for used on Amazon or thrift books and things like that. I used Ambleside Online for many years because it was free and it kind of gave me a framework to work within. However, again, it's Christian and it's very Eurocentric. So you do have to supplement in your Black history and literature where your kids can see themselves in the books that they're reading.
And so you said don't try to duplicate what happens at school, but that's all we know.
Right, that's right.
So now I don't know what to change to. So what would I do differently than school? Would I be more child driven? I mean, tell me what that would look like.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that homeschool does require a mindset change, not only for the parent and but for the child as well. One thing that wasn't on my radar that I didn't do with my oldest that I would recommend is deschooling. And not to be confused with unschooling, but deschooling is an opportunity for the parent and the child who are transitioning from public school now into a homeschool environment to kind of decompress and kind of get to know each other in this new dynamic and this new relationship. And as you mentioned, kind of asking your child what interests them. What part of history do you want to learn? What in science do you want to learn? Do you want to learn biology? Do you want to learn chemistry? You want earth science? I see you're into planets and things like that. Do you want to learn, this, that, and the third? You do have an opportunity to make the child's education more individualized, so according to their strengths and their weaknesses, and more personalized according to their interests and even your family values.
So you can take, but aren't there specific things you have to learn in each grade? Like the STEM, like you gotta learn so much science. Well, you gotta learn the foundations of everything. And so when you started with your, in the 6th grade, the foundational stuff, which is usually 1 through 3, she already knew her numbers. But when you started with, probably Journey had a little bit of insight, but then we started with the next baby and little man, then you had to start from scratch.
Yeah. So here's the thing with homeschooling. We have to also resist the urge to think that we are behind or that we have to grade our kids or judge them based upon some state mandated standards. Okay. My philosophy is that you are never behind. You are where you are. And so, kids are always learning. So while my son, he's in the 5th grade, getting ready to go into the 6th grade, he ain't the greatest speller. He just not. But through him having me cultivating an environment where he loves to read, and he's allowed the freedom to write about whatever interests him. And then I'm very gracious when I edit or correct his spelling. I've seen with my girls that organically that spelling improves. I want to cultivate for my kids a love for learning. So I've never been about like, I would kind of reference, okay, what types of things are kids learning in this grade or that grade? It's kind of give me, something to shoot for or some type of, loose framework. But we do mostly go off of what interests my kids.
Okay. So give me some more clarity on how you ensure that when they get out in the world, for example, they'll be able to effectively apply, like logical principles. I give you an example. Did they learn, um, the measures of central tendencies? Did they learn about, the measures is the curve, where you gotta, because that's kind of what's used in all statistics.
Did they learn
So,
about the curve in statistics?
well, yeah, I'm saying that like measures of central tendencies is when you measure things statistically
Mhm,
by the curve, and you have people who are on this side of the curve, that side of the curve. So if I was going to start a business,
mhm,
then what I would do is see if 80% of the people can be reached by this business, it's a great business opportunity.
mhm,
But if only 10% of the people way over here or 10% of the people way over here, then I
mhm,
already know. So the central tendencies are
mhm.
what you use to get to that. But that's a foundation of almost every statistic that they'll have to deal with in life.
But it depends on what they do. And even though I was exposed to that in high school, I
Hmm.
don't remember that. But
Hmm.
when I was validating my idea for what upon me, amongst other things like those articles that you referenced at the beginning, I pulled
Hmm.
numbers from those things and from other things and questionnaires and different things to validate my idea for creating the community. So
So
you
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to say, so you learn the skill, and
Mm-hmm.
you might not remember measures of central tendencies. I got to do
Mm-hmm.
it because I live in statistics, and so people don't remember it. We just
Mm-hmm.
we just know that if 80% if only 3% of the people like it, then it's probably not going to be an idea that will fly.
Right. Right.
So so we're measuring based on that, but you know the principle because you learned it in high school, and so now how do you know that they know what they will need to know later on in life?
So
Is there a testing process? Is there assessments that are done? I mean,
So because we live in the state of Missouri, we are
mm-hmm,
not required to test our kids.
okay,
Okay.
mm-hmm,
And when I say test our kids with regards to standardized testing and reporting those type of things, we
mm-hmm,
were considering moving to Charlotte a couple of years ago, and Charlotte does require that. Although they don't require that you send those in, they want you to have it done every year and kept in your records. Missouri is not like that. Okay.
mm-hmm,
So I have never had my kids tested for standardized testing. All right. My philosophy is that there are always going to be gaps in learning. Nobody knows everything all at one time. As long
mm-hmm,
as my kids know how to learn, and my kids have proven to me time and time again that they know how to learn and they have a desire to learn. So, like my oldest, well, Journey, the oldest that was still at
mm-hmm,
home, Journey taught herself how to sew, which entails a lot of math.
mm-hmm,
Journey can is a really good cook. She can cook anything that she wants to. I
mm-hmm,
like to tell the story. If you've heard me speak before, you've heard me share about how Journey has made me French macarons. I had a whole
mm-hmm,
tub of French
mm-hmm,
macarons for Mother's Day. Them little things is like
mm-hmm,
$3-4 a piece. I had a
mm-hmm,
whole tub. Because she knows how to make those things. She makes bread. She knows how to do whatever she sets her mind to. She's a self-taught dancer. That's what she
mm-hmm.
wants to do.
Okay, so I want to come back to that and speak
Okay.
specifically of what I know about the kids and how that relates to teaching them. But there's a question. Somebody typed in a question that says, "How does a homeschooling parent know the state's requirements?" Let's see. It says, for example, at the end of the day, what does the state require in order for a parent to have to accomplish in order to get started, get their job done? How do I know what the state wants me to do?
Okay, so speaking just for Missouri, let me just kind
Mm-hmm,
of go through that. So with Missouri, Missouri is considered a fairly low regulation state, which most homeschoolers appreciate that. We don't want people telling us what to teach our kids, when to teach them, and constantly assessing them. Okay, most of us don't want that. So Missouri is a low reg state. You have to teach 1,000 credit hours per calendar year. And I think the calendar year runs from pretty much June 30th to the following year, like July 1st or something like that. Okay. But most of us homeschool year round on some level. 600 of those credit hours have to be what's considered core subjects. Your core subjects are your reading, your writing, your arithmetic, your science, and your history. All right. So 600 of those 1,000 credit hours have to be some combination of those core subjects. Then the remaining 400 can be your electives, you know, whether your kid's in art, dance, martial arts, whatever, and other electives that you may want to teach your child. You don't have to let the state know that you're not required to let them know that you're homeschooling, but it is recommended that if your kid was in the public school system, that you send a withdrawal letter to the school that your kid was last enrolled to, so that they won't unnecessarily send a truancy officer or something like that to your house. But that's a courtesy. You're not required to let them know anything.
Okay, well, I don't want to drift from this question. So let's so you just outlined some dynamics that are very important about homeschooling in Missouri. So when you moved out of town, and when you got there, how did you know that the rules were different?
So for me, when we were considering moving, I checked the homeschool laws because that's important to me. I'm not going to move someplace that has over restrictive homeschooling laws. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. So for me, I know to check. You can easily Google whatever state you're living in, North Carolina homeschooling laws, or there's an organization called Homeschool Legal Defense Association, Homeschool Legal Defense Association.
And so it'd be HLDA?
Yes, .org, okay? And they are basically an organization of lawyers, and you can find your homeschooling laws there, and they have lots of resources there. So I would recommend all new homeschoolers familiarize themselves with Homeschool Legal Defense Association.
Right. And so, okay, so the state laws are printed, and is it best to go to a state site? Because when you Google, everybody in their basement can put stuff on Google. I just want to make sure people get to places where they actually find out something true and not opinion. So does the state list homeschooling laws on the state sites?
On the state, what do you call it? Like the Missouri has their education department.
Okay, the education department. Okay.
Yeah.
And so now, so that you make that transition, you officially withdraw them from whatever public school they're in. And then, and so you talked about testing and not testing. What kind of assessments are restrictive states expecting? And
so like for Charlotte, okay, we were our oldest now lives in Charlotte with our one and only grandson and her husband. And so we were strongly considering moving to Charlotte, North Carolina. Looked into the requirements there. I believe you have to establish yourself as a private school, so you do need a name, and you have to register yourself as a private school. I believe over in Kansas, you have to register yourself as a private school, and I think that's the only difference between homeschooling in Kansas and Missouri that I'm aware of.
No, don't move too fast for that, because that sounds complicated.
I'm coming back.
Okay.
So there are tests online that your kids can take. So what I looked up was the California Achievement Test.
Okay.
So even if you live in a state that doesn't require testing, if you're wanting to gauge where your kids are, which 9 times out of 10 you kind of know If you're
Mm-hmm.
homeschooling them every day and you're instructing them and leading them every day, you kind of know where the gaps are. But if you're wanting some type of standardized testing, the California Achievement Test is one that you can order, and you don't necessarily need a proxy in order to administer to your kids. So I
Okay.
had looked into that when I thought we were moving to Charlotte.
Charlotte. And so now, how do I register myself? Do I got to start an LLC? I mean, is it going to be just my family? I mean, how do you
So
do
in
that?
Missouri, you don't have to do any of that.
Well, I mean, in the restrictive states.
In a restrictive state, my understanding is, again, you have to, contact that Department of Education and register with the state and choose a homeschooling name, which we have a homeschooling name. We weren't required to have a homeschooling name, but just for, morale and just for us, I just like that type of thing. We do have a homeschooling name, even though we didn't need to create one or register as one.
So when you do, you just kind of fill out some registration papers and send them to the state.
As far as I understand, yep.
Okay. Now, so I'm going to shift the subject a little bit. There's a question that leads to the other discussions that I want to have, and the question is are there Black homeschooling co-ops in this area, and I mean this area being Kansas City and its surrounding areas? But let me start by saying, when I looked into homeschooling, doing some research some time back, then what I began to find and understand was that, number one, every association that I looked into, I couldn't find anybody that looked like us. And some of the places where they met, I'd have been pretty scared because of Confederate flags. Definitely wouldn't drive my kids up there. And so it seemed like, this is a scary thing. You'll be all alone. The other piece that's connected to that is, without the co-ops, then the social gap would be, I'd be trying to figure out, how do I get the social development to take place at the same time when the academic is taking place? Mm-hmm. So how do you address those combined issues? You can start with the co-ops.
Okay, so with regards to co-ops, there are thriving Black homeschooling communities depending upon where you live, okay? In St. Louis, which is where I did the majority of my homeschooling, there was not a Black homeschool co-op at that time. Right before I left, maybe a year before I left, a group of us had gotten together and had started to create one. I believe that they are still meeting, but I'm not sure. But if anybody has questions from the St. Louis area, I can definitely connect you with several homeschooling moms in St. Louis. Here in Kansas City, we've been back in Kansas City for almost 3 years. The first year we got back here, I did the first year or so, I guess, I did what many of us will often do when we get into homeschooling, which is isolate. All right. So because we just as soon isolate as opposed to put ourselves in those situations that you described where we would be alienated. Because I have endured that for many years. Right.
So because of the experience of alienation, isolation felt safe for you and the kids.
Exactly. Okay. And some of us don't even want to experience that isolation. We just don't want to be bothered. I mean, the alienation. So we just don't even want to be bothered with it, Okay. But I have put myself in those situations and have, been frustrated, angry, and my kids' feelings hurt off of different things that we've experienced in those environments, And so, yeah, when we first got back here to Kansas City, I was not aware of a go-to, group, cooperative support group or anything here in Kansas City for Black homeschoolers. So what I had to do, like many of us do, is go to Facebook and find the more national homeschool support groups on Facebook. And then you spend hours on end searching the comments, trying to find someone in your state. And then if they're in your state, you're hoping that they're in your city, or that they're at least an hour drive away, because we'll drive to connect with each other. You know what I'm saying? But that's what I was doing here in Kansas City, and was blessed to connect with a few other homeschooling moms here in the city, but there is no go-to place. Now I created What Up Homie, which initially was supposed to start out as an app to make it easier for homeschoolers to find and connect with each other online and then meet up offline. Because 15 years living in 3 different places, I've had to do that. You know, I've had to not only acclimate myself with the new community that I'm in and the new environment I'm in, and find out where the dance classes are, or where the martial arts classes are, foreign language classes are, but I want to know where the homeschoolers that look like me are. And there was no easy way to do that. The only tool we had was Facebook, but that's time consuming and frustrating. And so my goal is to make it easier. So that's why I created What Up Homie, which right now is an online community, but eventually, Lord willing, will evolve into an app that will make it easier for us to find and connect with one another.
Okay, which is great. What Up Homie, just like it sounds just like it is, but you can type it in there, so if folks want to go to that space, they can kind of go there and check it out. So you talked about activities like classes, the active classes they can take, whether it be martial arts or whatever it is, pony riding, whatever they want to do. Is there a social world where regular activities are planned and other things? I know now the kids who are homeschooled can be active in sports, because most of the sports, when public schools abandon sports, then a lot of people outside of schools picked up. And so now you can put your kid in a baseball, basketball, football, everything else without being actually enrolled in school. However, it is fun to go to the gym and play, or go to all those different kinds of things. Are there times where homeschool groups get together, and our kids would be like Black homeschool groups? I mean, you see somebody who look like you, at least 50% of the people. Then are they out there, and how would one find them?
So in your places like Atlanta, they're all over the place. Like, I was just talking to a mom at one of our meetups, and I was telling her everybody needs at least one homeschooling homegirl. You can find just one, it makes a world of difference. And she was like, one? My group has like 70 families, and I need all 70 of them. And I'm like, that's a blessing. That has never been my experience. Like I said,
is it because they're not there, or is it because they're not reachable?
We don't know where to find them. We don't know. We're out here. We don't know where to find each other. So it's like I said, with What Up Homie, I'm hoping that it gets to a point where it's kind of like Mocha Moms, because Mocha Moms was another resource that I would turn to try to connect with other homeschooling moms when I moved out of town. So when I moved to St. Louis, I reached out to Mocha Moms and joined Mocha Moms, and was connected with some other homeschooling moms, and inspired some folks to start homeschooling through Mocha Moms, through our connection with Mocha Moms. When I moved to Grand Rapids, I was only in Grand Rapids for a year. Same thing, went to a Mocha Moms meeting, asked to be referred to any homeschooling moms. I was given like the name of 4 different homeschool moms, and only one of them was still homeschooling. And one of them that I spoke to said, I wish I would have met you last year, because so many of us never start homeschooling because we don't know another sister that's doing it. Or some of us start homeschooling and then we get discouraged and we stopped homeschooling because we didn't have the connection and community in order to keep moving forward. So
if now here's another question I think is interesting to me, is that the most unused facilities in almost every community, especially in the Black community throughout the week, are churches. And so I'm just curious as to why churches aren't a key resource to support homeschools, and and why homeschoolers don't lead organizations like What Up Homie through associations and connections with churches.
So here's the thing: in the white community, they are.
Uh,
But homeschooling, let's be real, homeschooling is not really normalized in the Black community. And that's what I'm trying to do, is normalize homeschooling in the Black community.
Maybe COVID is an opportunity for people to at least explore.
Absolutely.
And kind of figure out what to do. So what would have to happen for the Black church to be as interested in this topic as the white church is?
You know, I don't know. I think that maybe if you have a church member that is homeschooling, maybe them providing an opportunity for folks who are even a little bit interested to ask questions, because so many people, I think, have had a desire to homeschool even before COVID. At least that's what I was finding in my research. For What Up Homie, is that there are so many women that had an interest in homeschooling, but they may have been single moms, they work full time, and so they just automatically think that they can't do it, but they can.
Now, is there such a thing as a homeschooling training or workshop or preparation or something that would say, you know, I really want to do this. I see right now it's a necessity in my family. You know, I'm going to this weekend event with some other people who are interested, and we're going to learn about homeschooling.
So, yeah, there are, especially these days, everyone is kind of declaring themselves an expert and a guru and offering consulting. And I've even been told that maybe I should offer some consulting because I give away lots of information and resources for free. I'm very passionate about homeschooling. I'm very passionate about the Black family, and What Up Homie gives me an opportunity to serve both. So, but yes, the answer is yes. There are lots of online conferences going on these days. There are lots of folks offering homeschooling consulting these days that will, you know, help you get started.
And so when you think about the big picture of things, and I'll give you kind of the short version of it, but right now we're having a big challenge when it comes to law enforcement. And law enforcement is a last result of how to address morals and ethics gone bad. In other words, if you address the morals and ethics, then the enforcement part would be less needed. So so we're trying to correct the last element. Like, we're telling people how to put the fire out rather than to prevent the fire.
Right.
And right now, you know, what I see is every time something happens, we're going to add more enforcement. But statistically, in this country, all enforcement is done, in the world, all enforcement has ever done is increase the needed capacity to restrict people's freedom. I mean, it's really all it's done. What we've seen in places where they started looking at, let's target those other two areas. So the primary responsibility for morals and ethics actually land in the home, the church, and the community. And so what happened at some point is people said, I'm going to stop teaching my kid morals and everything else. I'll just drop them off at school and they'll do everything there. So as the moral standards and the ethical standards at schools have changed, so have, or disappeared because they weren't important anymore, so has all of the other, you know, the behaviors that we're looking for. So I guess I'm wanting to say that if we had much more homeschooling, would that transform who people are as parents and transform their kids' experiences? I want you to answer that question.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so what has homeschooling made you?
So I don't necessarily consider myself a teacher. I am a guide. And so my job is to help my kids discover who God created them to be. So one of the blessings of homeschooling was that I got to see my kids gifting when they were small, and then encourage them to continually cultivate those things for the glory of God.
Okay.
So I definitely, I have grown and matured, so much. You've been knowing me since I was a teenager.
Right.
I am not who I used to be at all, and I'm not who I thought I would be. I'm so much better, but I think the freedom of homeschooling has, created an environment where I had the freedom not only to grow as I guided and led my children and learned alongside them. Again, there are a myriad of things that I learned in high school and in school that I forgot. You forget those things if you don't practically apply them every day. History was super boring to me in high school. I love history now, as I'm teaching it to my kids, because I'm teaching it to them in a way that is more relevant. I mean, I think what we all learn in the public school, private school, whatever sector is American mythology. We ain't learning American history. White folks don't know their history. They know mythology. We all need to learn real history, and it would benefit us all. I think that would impact some of the dynamics that we have going on culturally and socially.
So it's on one side, it is for you, when you learned it, it was a bunch of information unrelated to you, taught to you in a way that was different from how you learned. In this case, it is relevant. It's the same information, but it's very relevant in how it relates to you. It's not generalized.
That's right.
It's very specifically relevant, and it could drive there. And that also changed your learning experience also.
Well, that, and also the method. Like, textbooks are just kind of like dry facts, rotely memorized. When you're reading stuff from a narrative perspective, you can kind of connect in that, first person telling of the story.
It's relationship oriented.
Exactly.
Okay, let me give you two questions here, or either a combined question. One of them is, you made a statement about single parents working full time can also think about homeschooling, and that's part A of the question. And then the second part of the question is does homeschooling imply that you as the parent are going to be the only or the primary teacher, or can you have other people? Can I have Auntie come over and do this class, and she's in charge of that, and have Mama come over and do this? And I mean, can you create an environment where learning subjects and everything else kind of fits? And I know that creates a whole different social, because you got to have a teaching style that everybody buys into. But but are both of those a thing? And how does a single parent take care of?
Absolutely.
Move into this way, yeah.
Absolutely. You would want to tap into your support system as a single parent in order to achieve what you're trying to achieve in homeschooling your children. Yes, there are, like, I've had people over the years ask me, could I homeschool their kids? But they want to pay me. And you can't, at least in the state of Missouri, couldn't get paid to homeschool someone else's kids. I think the law says you can have maybe up to 3 kids that are not your kids that you're educating. But I've had friends that have homeschooled other friends or family members' kids. So the short answer is yes, someone else can homeschool
but they can't
your
get paid
child for you, but you can't pay them. Yeah.
Okay.
What you can do.
Go ahead, give your answer, and then I'll expand on the question.
I was going to say, what you can do, however, is if there is a subject that you are not strong in, like this year, take for instance, pre-COVID, and there's a misconception about homeschoolers being at home all the time. That's the furthest thing from the truth. Me and my kids were out of the house Monday through Thursday, and we met up with friends on Fridays. So we were not always in the house. On Mondays and Wednesdays, for the first time, I did register my kids with a co-op, my girls rather, rather, for a class in Johnson County. It was a biology class that they attended on Mondays and Wednesdays. Okay. So my girls took a biology class at a co-op in Johnson County on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then on Tuesdays, they had math tutoring. So my girls were high schoolers and getting up into, algebra 2 and so on and so forth. And it was getting a little bit more challenging. So I had to outsource that. So they met with a math tutor every Tuesday. And then on Thursdays, they wanted to learn Japanese, the Japanese language. And so I was blessed to find a native speaker in Blue Springs. And I took them all three to her house on Thursdays to learn Japanese. So we were out of the house quite often. Yes, you can outsource certain subjects and different things that may not be your strong suit. Yes, you can have grandma come over and administer lessons for you, or auntie or whatever, administer lessons to you. And I would strongly recommend that for a single mom working full time who's wanting to homeschool.
All right. And so now I want to ask you just kind of some yes or no questions. And I know you'll have an explanation, but I want them to be yes or no questions.
Okay.
All right. So do your kids ever know more academically than you?
Yes.
All right. Would your kids say they prefer homeschooling? You got to answer for each one.
Oh, that's a good question. I think it depends on the day, honestly.
So it varies from day to day.
Yeah, that's just the real. I mean, some days they like it, some days they don't.
What's the warning that you need to give folks? Listen, if you're going to go into this, you better what?
Collaborate with your kids.
Okay.
Collaborate with them.
Can you be unorganized and still be successful?
Yes.
All right.
There are two myths. You got to be organized and you got to have a patience, have all this, supernatural patience. No, I have neither of them. So, no.
All right. So, does this work if your children are not disciplined?
Yes.
Okay. And then, huh? You can say more. You're going to say more.
If your kids are undisciplined, it can work. Of course, it's going to be a little more challenging. But again, I just think kind of like I vaguely recall from reading the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You bring them to the table, you collaborate with them, you'll have an easier time of getting them to buy in. Okay. And there are certain things that I do, and I believe that parents should do to allow their kids a lot of freedom. So, yes.
Okay. And then you talked a lot about moms. Do you have any dads in the co-op that are the primary facilitators of learning with their kids?
So there are some, but most of the time, the primary educator is the mom. When we first moved back to Kansas City, I went back to work full-time for a little while, and my husband was focusing in on our real estate investment company. But because he was self-employed, it gave him the freedom to be the one to educate them before going to do what he needed to do. So for that year, he took over homeschooling. So,
and so the internet, now I can imagine with homeschooling when I was a kid versus homeschooling nowadays, the internet would be a big part of what takes place. How critical is the internet? I mean, did you do a lot of online stuff? How did that work? How computer savvy do you need to be?
So I've never really been big on completely online curriculum. I have supplemented in certain years supplemented certain online activities and resources that I've found, but I've never, like I said, I come from more of a perspective of using books, reading books, we really didn't even like reading ebooks,
Okay.
there are lots of books that we had access to as ebooks that I still felt like it would be better for me to turn around and actually purchase the book so that they can hold it in their hands, they can annotate and highlight or do whatever they needed to do to engage with the book. So, but yeah, there's a math drill online resource that I've used pretty much every year with one or all of my kids called Extra Math. It's XTRAMATH, and it might be, I think it's .com, but it might be .org. But Extra Math is just online math drills.
Okay.
So they're drilling them on math facts. So different things like Extra Math and but yeah, I just have never been big on complete online stuff. But there are a lot of people that do use it. There are lots of resources out there, especially.
And but we do have online a teacher who have taught for many years, and in the classroom setting, she is Miss Olivia Davenport, who is an amazing person who has not only, when she retired from teaching, she's published a book. Hopefully she's in the middle of publishing the last writing that she did for us at the church. But she is also teaching us about mentoring and supporting the discipleship and coaching people on an adult level. But her statement here to one of the questions I asked you is, as a teacher and a guide in the classroom with many personalities, this is talking about when you get all the people in the same way together, and you don't want to disrupt who they are individually, but you need them to work together collectively. She says there will be a melding and consideration of all of the personalities, including the teacher's personality, how you facilitate it, because you offer that opportunity for that collective unity to come together, or you don't. It is the group syndrome that we know as norm, storm, norming, storming, performing. Well, it's forming, storming, norming, performing. That means we get together and we try to find our place. We storm, we argue, fight about stuff. Then we normalize that, and then we become a very functional group. The problem is that with homeschooling, that happens, but not enough people are experiencing that kind of unity as siblings and as a family anymore. And homeschooling seems to contribute greatly to that. And what I want to do is follow up on an action plan on how we can begin to at least introduce the idea to churches at this point, to say you have a facility that is going to waste most of the time. And if we had some kind of vehicle to which it can support homeschooling, especially amongst Black folks in the urban core, maybe we can learn from what our white corner counterparts are doing, or something. But it should not be a task that young mothers are fighting on their own. This has been Urban Talk, and as usual, we try to draw out enough information so that we can take action. Talking is great, but action is better. Faith without works is dead. So we will see you guys in the future with more Urban Talks, and we'll definitely have more conversations about homeschooling. So we thank Mick for hanging with us. Tell your husband and family we said hey.
I will.
And, so you guys are enjoying some alone time while the kids are gone. Huh?
Well, Solomon's here.
Solomon's here, my man, little man. Yeah. He's a big man now. He grown up.